Welcome to the tutorial creating a full character turnaround deformation rig. So in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to create a deformation rig for the front, 3/4 profile and profile views of the Karate Rabbit. So to begin we have to look at an option in our preferences. So if you're using Windows that would be under Edit Preferences. If you're on a Mac it would be under Stage Preferences. So we have to scroll across to find the Deformation tab, which is right here, and we have to make sure that the Create Posed Deformer in Create Deformation above under option is enabled. So if you're creating simple chains like we did in the two previous videos, then it's good to have this disabled. However, if you're creating a deformation chain where you want several poses rigged and grouped together, it's good to check this option. So I'm just going to go over the setup of this rabbit, so what we have so far. Basically every part of this rabbit is on a different layer, so it's very similar to the cutout style. The only difference being the arms and the legs. So if we select one of the arms here with the transform tool, we can click on this button to find it in the timeline view. And then we go to the drawing, we can see that this arm is not cut at the elbow as it would be with a cutout puppet. And the same thing goes for the legs. In the drawing view, it's not cut off at the knee, so that's probably the biggest difference between the way you set up a cutout character for a deformation rig versus just a simple cutout character puppet. Obviously, it's up to you to rig it the way you want. You still can cut it at the joints. It's very specific to your own puppet. And then if we scroll up, we can see that the head here, which is right here, has all the facial features attached to it. So the eyebrows, the nose, the mouth, we even have the two ears here. And that's the same if we go to the network view. Let me back out a bit. It's hard for you to see any of these specific modules, but you can notice that there are no pegs available here because then we'd see green boxes, and there are no deformation groups that have been created yet, except for this one, which I'm using as an example to show you something later, but in general there are no light blue boxes attached to anything. So it's really not been rigged yet at all. And the reason that we want all our drawing objects on separate layers is twofold. Firstly, we want them to avoid being stretched when we don't want them to be stretched. So obviously if the eyes, the eyebrows, the ears, etc. were on the same drawing layer and attached to the same deformation chain, if I stretch this ear, it's going to end up stretching part of the face, so we don't really want that. On top of that, we're also able to swap drawings if we have every drawing on its own layer. So for example, the eyebrow here, the number 1 eyebrow, which is the left side eyebrow, has several different drawings for the same body part, and in fact it also has several different drawings for each view of the body part. So that's also one advantage to having all the body parts on different layers. The other thing I want to show you is you may have noticed there are a few keyframes as we scroll down. So there's one down here too. All that is, if we open the data view, and if I open this drawing layer up, we can see that the Z position is now at minus 0.001, and that just means that I took this arm and I nudged it back behind the body. And it looks like I nudged it back for the 3/4 version here because the Z position is back to 0. So that's all those keyframes are, and I just don't want you to worry too much about that. So now let's talk about the naming convention of the drawings. With deformation specifically, the names of the drawings are actually quite important because that becomes the name of the subgroup. I don't want to get too ahead of myself here, but let's go into this group so I can show you what I mean. I'm going to zoom in, and this was originally a deformation group that was created for the Karate Rabbit's arm number 2, which is this arm here on the right side. So if we enter the group, you can see there are 3 groups here. And what each group represents is the rig for one of the 3 views of the Karate Rabbit O2 arm. And right now number 2 represents the first view, number 3 represents the 3/4 profile, and number 4 represents the profile view. So if you think about it, what we're going to do is we're going to create the bones for this arm, and those bones will pertain to this drawing. But the thing is, this drawing is on the same layer and in the same module as the drawing for its 3/4 profile. So we're going to have to create another set of bones for this arm because it's not positioned in the same place, and that goes the same for the profile. So obviously we want all of these 3 skeletons to be rigged. If we go back to the top, this will eventually be rigged to this layer here, this drawing layer here. So how does that work out? Well, it works out by having these 3 grouped separately but attached to the same composite. But when you're working with a big character, what does 2, 3, 4 mean to you? It doesn't really mean anything. It might. I mean, maybe you work in a studio where number 1 is always considered the front view, number 2 the 3/4 view, number 3 the profile, maybe 4 is back 3/4, and 5 is completely back of the character. So if that's the numbering convention you use, that's fine. However, if you don't use that numbering convention, it's best to go into the X-sheet view and actually rename these drawings to front, 3/4, and side, so that when this starts to happen and you go into a group, at least you can see here that it's the arm, it's arm number 2, it belongs to the Karate Rabbit, and you can see that this would be the front, 3/4, and side. And so in this case specifically, the naming convention has more to do with avoiding confusion. So what I'll do is I will actually rename this one arm, but I'm not going to do it for all the body parts because that would take a lot of time. But we're going to do it just for this one arm so we can do it together. So this is arm number 2. Let's go back to the top. So we can press O, the keyboard shortcut O, to take us to that group. In the X-sheet view, we'll also now be at that group. And I'm sure most of you already know how to name drawings, but just to go over it, you never double click and then type the name in, because what you're doing is you're either creating a new empty drawing or you're calling up a drawing that already exists. So that is not the way to name a drawing. In fact, the way that you name it is you right click on a cell and you select drawing, rename drawing, or you can use the keyboard shortcut Shift Command D on Mac, and I believe it's Shift Control D on Windows, but you can always double check by right clicking and looking at the keyboard shortcut listed beside the rename drawing menu item. So what we're going to do is name this drawing quarter for 3/4 profile view, because it looks like I'm starting on frame 13, and in the camera view we can see that we're at the 3/4 profile. And then if I click OK, we can see that all the instances of what was formerly drawing number 2, which represents the arm for the 3/4 view, have now been renamed in the X sheet. So let's do the same thing for the front view. So we're going to right click, select drawing, rename drawing, and let's change this to front. And lastly, for the profile view, let's select drawing number 3 and do the same thing. I'm going to name that one side. So now when I create my deformation rig for this arm, we'll see that those 3 blue groups will be named front, quarter, and side, as opposed to 2, 3, and 4. So once again, that's the reason we're doing that. So there is a second naming convention that we have to adhere to, and this one is an absolute, because it actually has to do with the programming behind the software and behind the deformation feature, and that's how we name extra drawings. So the drawings we use when we want to swap drawings. So for example, let's look at the foot right here. If we scroll through the front view, we'll see that there's several different pairs of shoes or different drawings for the feet of the Karate Rabbit, for the front, 3/4, and profile views, because each has an analogous drawing. So the way that we would name this has to do with a numerical system. So it's actually already been done for foot number 2, so you can see it right here. The first drawing would be called front because it is the foot for the front view. The second drawing would be named front +1. The third, front +2. I'm not sure why one was skipped here just as front +3. Maybe that was just an error, but you get the picture. You should always have a plus a digit, and obviously it makes more sense to go in numerical order of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. So let's do that for the other foot, which is this one right here that has not been renamed. So this naming convention exists from when this rabbit was used as a cutout puppet. So F1 is a very common naming convention to represent front pose drawing 1. So what we're going to do in this case is very similar to what we did when we renamed the drawings for the 3 views. So I'm going to click on this one here, right-click on it and select Drawings, Rename Drawing, and once again use Shift-Command-D or Shift-Control-D. So this time I'm going to name this first drawing Front without a plus sign or a digit, and then click OK because that's the first drawing, of course, and this drawing is going to define the view. Then I'm going to do the same for the second drawing. Select it, right-click on it, select Drawing, Rename Drawing, and this time I'm going to name it Front +1 and say OK. And this time let's try using the keyboard shortcut. We'll do it one more time, but this time with the digit 2, and one last time. Okay. So because this naming convention is so important, I'm going to go through the entire Karate Rabbit setup and go through and rename all the extra drawings that need to be renamed in this way. And that includes the eyebrows, the eyes, the mouth, hands, and feet. But because it is a repetitive action, I'm probably going to speed up this section of the video. The last thing I want to mention about the renaming is that this is really the time to do it, because once we start rigging our puppet with deformers, it's no longer possible because the software really takes the names of these different views to become the subgroups in the deformation chain. So once these subgroups are created, as you saw when we went inside the deformer that I created for the right arm, those groups have already been named 1, 2, and 3, and it's no longer possible at that time to rename them. There really is a link that's created between the name and the subgroup, so it's impossible to change at that point. And that's the same for the extra drawings. Once we've created a deformer for the first drawing, it won't recognize the extra drawings if they're not named properly. It will take them to be different views. So please do all of that before we start rigging. So that being said, let's start the rigging process. So we're going to go back to the timeline, and we're going to start with the limbs of the front view, so the 2 arms and the 2 legs. So let's look for them in our timeline. So we have the first arm here. I'm going to slide the red playhead to the first frame, and actually I'm going to zoom in just a little bit by using either Command or Control plus. And I'm going to use the setup tool here. And once again, all of these parameters that are set is what's going to be my influence type, my influence radius, etc. For this bone. So I'm going to have an infinite influence for all the bones I'm going to create, and I'm going to keep it in this automatic mode so that I can decide whether I want to have bones and articulations or curves. It is recommended as we flip between the views that you keep the same type of deformer. So if you rig with bones and articulations for the front view of the arm, you would continue doing that for the 3/4 profile and the side view. However, it's not an absolute, so you can change your deformer style between views. So I'm going to start by clicking on the shoulder and not dragging so that I get my offset root, clicking where the elbow joint is, and then clicking again at the wrist. And because the hand is on a different drawing, that's it for this drawing. So then we're going to move on to the 3/4 profile, and it's actually hidden. So what I'm going to do is hide some of the drawings here, such as the body, so that we can see the hidden arm, which is here. And I might hide that leg as well. And just to be safe, I might hide the arm. Okay, so I'm going to start my chain at the shoulder, once again go for the elbow, and then go for the wrist. And once again, we're going to be able to refine this using the setup mode later on. So now let's go to the profile view, and I'm going to hide the last leg because it really is kind of getting in the way there. And maybe even the last hand so we have a nice clean view. Okay, so I'm going to start here at the shoulder, go for the elbow, and go for the wrist. So now we have our 3 views rigged for this arm. So now let's go back to the front view, and let's bring up the other arm so that we can see it. And we can do the same thing now for this. So we're going to select the drawing group either in the timeline, or you can do it here in the network view. It's up to you. We're going to click on the shoulder, click on the elbow, click on the wrist. I'm going to click on the arm again. I might show selected deformers and hide all others so that that other one doesn't get in the way. And I'm going to click on the shoulder, elbow, and wrist. And then go over to the profile view and do the same thing. So shoulder, elbow, wrist. Like that. So I'm going to keep doing that for all the other parts of the body that I need to do. And once again, I might speed up that section of the video as it is a repetitive process, but I'll obviously stop and take note if there's anything of importance to mention to you. And just one last thing, you can see here in the network view that a deformation group has been created for this arm, as it has for the other arm, which is over here. So this time what I'm going to do is create a curved deformer on the foot because of the shape and nature of the Karate Rabbit's foot. So I'm going to click and drag at the same time. So I have the beginning of a curved handle, and then do the same thing here. So you can see a slight curve, and like I said, I'm going to fix the curve in the setup mode afterwards. And actually this is a good time to bring up the extra drawings because the foot does have extra drawings. If you use the keyboard shortcut G and you scroll through all the extra drawings, you can see the red playhead moving across here. What's happening now is that this deformer, this curved deformer, is now becoming the rig or the skeleton for all the extra drawings. And it's acknowledging that this bone is good for all those drawings. Even though they're all separate drawings, it acknowledges it's the same view, and now you can see that it's disappeared, the curved deformer, because we are now on a new view. Once again, due to the naming structure. I don't know if you've noticed it before, but when you see the C+, that means that you're going to create a curve. And when you click without dragging, you'll see that it becomes a B+ to indicate that you're creating a bone. So we're going to use G to move across. And you'll notice here that I also start at the ankle and then go to the tip instead of going to the toes and then going to the ankle. And that's because I really do want the rotational control from the ankle joint. And that's something that's good to bear in mind. Okay, so now I've completed the deformation rig of the cartoon rabbit. You may have noticed that there are a few parts that I did not rig, such as the hands, the tail, the head, and that's one of the major differences between rigging for a cutout puppet and creating a deformation rig. Not every body part gets a deformer the way that every body part gets a peg. Body parts that are not rigged with a deformer are linked to body parts that are, so that the deformation chain almost acts as a peg. And then, of course, all the parts of the body, such as the arms, the ears, the legs, etc., that you want to be able to create bends and folds with, have a deformation rig. So let's get on to that second part of putting the skeleton together. So if we go into the network view and we look around, you'll see that the facial features such as the eyes, the nose, and mouth are already attached to the head. So the drawing modules for those drawings are attached to the drawing module of the head. However, if you don't already have that done, this would be a good time to do that. So after you finish that, the next thing we're going to look at is the deformation group for the body. So let's bring it a little bit better into view. So what we want to do is basically attach the arms, the legs, the tail, and the head to the body deformation group, but we want to attach them in a way that they won't be deformed when we bend the body. We just want them to follow the body when the body moves. So to do this, you just have to select the deformation group in the network view and then click on this button here, Create Kinematic Output. And if you just noticed, a new port was added to the deformation Karate Rabbit body group. So now if we go inside that group, we can take a look around. So maybe I should have showed you what the group looked like before we added that kinematic module. But what it looked like is exactly like this, but without this right here, which is the Deformation Karate Rabbit Body Kinematic. And so if we take a look at the network structure, what we have here is very similar to what we saw with the simple deformation chain in the first few videos. You have your deformation root, you have your skeleton. So in this case, the system of bones and articulations are in 3 different groups. The first one being the skeleton for the body for the front view, the second being the skeleton for the body for the 3/4 view, and the third being the skeleton for the body in the profile view. And if you remember what I said earlier, that because I didn't rename these, they will always remain as 1, 2, and 3 to represent the poses of front, 3/4, and side. So all of these 3 skeleton groups or deformation rigs then go into the deformation composite, the deformation switch, and then out through the multi-port out, back into the top of the network view. And that makes total sense. If we start to animate with the deformation skeleton on the body in any of those views, it'll deform just as we would like it. But now with this new kinematic group, we're taking these skeletons and we're just taking the position information for these skeletons and creating a place where we can now attach a set of limbs without them having to worry about being deformed by these 3 skeletons. So what I'm going to do first of all is select this group, and because I have the layer properties already in this view, I'm going to rename this composite so that it's easy to follow along. And I'm going to name this body neck. So we know that this module belongs to the body, and whatever is attached to it will be attached from the neck. So what we want to attach to the neck, of course, is the head. So if we exit the group and we go back to the top, with this new port out here, what we can do is if we take this up, we can now attach the head to this group, and this head will now only move with the rest of the body but will not be deformed by any of the body's rig. So let's go back into the deformation Karate Rabbit body group once more. So this is good for the neck, and in fact it works out perfectly this way because the place where the head will attach is the last bone in each of these skeletons, and of course the last bone is the neck bone right here, so that makes perfect sense. However, now we want to create another kinematic group for the shoulders, but the shoulders we don't want to attach to the neck, of course. We want to attach to this bone right here, the solid non-rotating bone. If we attach it to the articulation between the neck and this chest bone, obviously the arms will rotate when the neck rotates, so we don't want that. So we definitely want this very stable center bone. So the first thing we have to do is go back to the top, select the deformation group again, click on the create kinematic output one more time, get that third port, go back into the group, and this time what we're going to do is rename the group, of course, so that we don't get confused. And this time I'm going to rename it body shoulders. And then what we're going to do is go into the first skeleton, so that's the front, or the first rig for the Karate Rabbit's body. So this is the front view. So if we look at this deformation chain, we're going to try to look for this bone here. And we know that the root starts here between the Karate Rabbit's legs, so that's the deformation root and the offset. Then we have the first bone, which is the pelvic bone here. The first articulation, which is where the belly button is right here. We have another bone, which is this chest bone, which is what we're looking for. The articulation here represents the articulation of the neck, so where the neck rotates from, and the last bone is the neck bone. So right now we see that the neck bone is connected to the composite as well as the switch, which is good, and it goes in once more for the body neck composite, which is also good because it really should be coming from the neck bone. But this other one here we don't want. So what we're going to do is we're going to drag a wire or a cable out from this bone, which is the chest bone, hook it to the multi-port out, and then unhook this other cable. And as you can see, the port is still there, and the reason that is if we go back up one level, we'll see that out of the body group here, and we actually have to zoom in to see it because it's not super clear to see, there are 4 ports coming out. So this one we don't want. This goes into the regular composite, which is good. This goes into the kinematic composite for the body neck, which is good. And if you pass your mouse over it, you can even see it says bone _2, so we know that's good. And this one is the one that we don't want, so we're going to unhook that. by going down here, because this is where the neck bone connects to the shoulders, which we don't want. And now we want to drag a cable from this port into the body shoulder composite, which is perfect. And like I said, you can pass over the ports to see which bone is being passed out. So this is bone 1, this is bone 2, and this is the deformation switch. And if we go in here, we can see bone 2 is the neck, bone 1 is the chest bone. So that's perfect. That's exactly what we want. So now we're, oh, I went out one group too many. So now we have to do the same thing for the 3/4 profile and for the profile view. So we'll go into skeleton number 2. We'll connect in bone number 1, unhook bone number 2, carefully there. We'll go back to the body group here, and then we're going to unhook this port here, and we're going to hook this one in instead, like that. And once again, you can verify again. This should be the deformation switch, which it is. This should be bone 2, which is the neck, and this should be bone 1, which is the chest. And obviously bone 0 is the pelvic bone, so that's perfect. And I know it's a little bit confusing, so you have to be really careful because each of these 3 groups goes into its regular chain, the neck, and the shoulders. So you have to be careful. So let's go into the last group, the profile view, so it's known as number 3 in this case. And once again, exactly the same thing. We can pull out a cable from here, unhook this one very carefully, make sure it doesn't attach to any of these other modules on its way out. Go back up one, zoom in, so we can see it's the last cable here. So we're going to unhook that, and then we're going to grab a cable from the new port and plug it in. And try to keep the same order because you're really just replacing an incorrect positioning. So as long as you keep the same order here and the same order here, you should be okay. So now we have to do that 2 more times, once for the tail and once more for the hips, which connects to the legs. Oh, and the last thing we have to do, I'm sorry, is now that we have this port, we just created the shoulders. So what we want to attach to this, of course, are the arms. So let's look for those. So we have one here, and we're attaching it right to the deformation group. So I'm going to grab this cable, attach it to the deformation group for the arm. Let's zoom in so you can see that. So deformation group for the arm right here. Then if we go over here where I know the other arm is, it's this one right here, we have to do the same thing. And remember, you can pull 2 cables out of the same port, so that's what I'm going to do, and hook it in like that. So now everything is properly hooked up from that port, going to the body shoulder group. So let's select the body deformation group one more time. Let's click on the create kinematic output. Once again, a new port is created. Let's go back inside. Let's select that new kinematic module, and let's rename it to body hips. So this, of course, is where we're going to attach the legs to. So let's go into the front view again. This time we're looking at this cable here. So they keep getting added to the left side if you haven't noticed. And then we know that the hip bone is actually very close to the deformation of the root and the offset. And that's this bone right here. So we're going to drag this cable and hook it into the multi-port out. Unhook the cable that was just there. Go back up one level. So this time we're looking at the cables attached to this group right here, the body hips. Oh, it looks like I have an extra underscore I don't need. And we're going to unhook this one right here. And if we zoom in, there's an extra port here that you can't see, but I know it's there. I'm going to pull and drag a cable from it and hook it to the front. I'm just going to zoom in to double check everything is okay. See, I picked it from the wrong port. So it's this one right here I want to pull it from. I thought that it looked like there were two wires coming from the same port. So there we go. So that's good. Now we're going to go into group number 2 and do the same thing. So as you can see, it might have been a really good idea to rename all of these. If I had named this neck rotation, or neck articulation, or neck joint, chest bone, belly button, pelvis bone, then when I pass over the ports outside of this group, if we go on up one level, I'll actually see the word neck bone, or I'll actually see the word hip bone. So it's even better than seeing bone 1 or bone 2, because if you're doing something really quickly, that might not mean anything to you, where the name will always mean something to you. A neck bone will always be a neck bone. So it is, once again, a really good idea to probably rename. So that being said, I'm going to pull the cable from the pelvis bone, hook it into the multi-port out, unhook the bone that was coming from the neck, return one group upwards. This time I'm looking at this module right here. We see that it goes in right here, so we're going to unhook that. We know, even though we can't see it because we're really far away, that there's another port here. So I can pull a cable from it and hook it back into place between the front view and the profile view. And lastly, we're going to go into the profile view and do it one more time. So pelvic bone, multi-port out, get rid of the neck bone, go up one, pull out this last cable, pull a new cable from the new port, and put it into place. And then we're going to return to the top. And this time we just created the hips, so we're looking for the 2 legs. And obviously there are various ways of doing this. You can select the leg in the camera view with the transform tool, and then click in the network view again and use the keyboard shortcut O to find it. So here it is right here with the deformer. So what we want to do is pull this cable and hook it to the deformer. I'm just going to zoom in to double check that that's the correct module. So it is the Deformation Karate Rabbit 01 leg. And the same thing goes for the second leg, which happens to be right here. I see it. So I'm going to select highlight it so I can see it more easily. Pull a cable from the same port and hook it in. So we have one more to do, and that's the tail. So I'll do that one really quick. We're going to click on the deformation group, click on the create kinematic output, go inside, rename our kinematic module to body tail, we're going to go into the front view, and we're going to actually hook the tail to exactly the same place that we hooked up the legs, and that's the hips. So that's this bone right here. We'll hook that up. We'll unhook the other one. We'll go up a group. We'll unhook it from this port. Then we'll pull a cable from the new port and hook it in. And let's do that again for this group. We're going to pull a cable to the multi-port out. We're going to unhook the neck cable, go back up one, unhook this cable here and then pull from the new port and put it in, and one last time. Hip to multi-port out, get rid of the neck bone. Get rid of this cable here. Actually, let me enlarge just so it makes it easier to see, because this is kind of ridiculously small. Okay, and then from this new port, grab it and hook it in. And everything there looks good. There should be 5 cables coming from each of these groups, and there should be 4 cables going into each of these groups. And so that looks good. And we're going to go back to the top. And this time we're looking for the tail. So I do need, in fact, to see the tail here so that I can find it by using the keyboard shortcut O in the network view. And it's all the way out here at the end. So I'm going to pull the cable from this last port and hook it to the tail. So that's pretty good. So the only thing we're missing now is that we have 2 feet and 2 hands that need to be connected to their respective limbs. So let's look for the feet first. The feet have deformation groups, so they're probably over here somewhere. So yeah, we have a foot here and a foot here. So we're not actually going to hook them into the main body because they don't work from the main body. They actually work from their respective limbs, their respective leg. So I'm just going to select this foot and its deformation group and bring it down here to put it in a good position to be attached to the deformation group for the second leg of the Karate Rabbit. And what I'm going to do is select the deformation group for the second leg of the Karate Rabbit and click on the Create Kinematic Output to create a second port. I'm going to go in and I'm going to select my group and I'm going to call it leg ankle. So we know that that's what's going on there. And in the case of the leg, I believe the last bone that we see is actually the ankle bone. We create from the hip, the knee, the ankle. The ankle will be the last bone, so it's correct that, let me go in the group just to double check. So let's show controls and let's show selected deformers and hide all others to hide the body. Oh, I might have to show it again. There we go. So yeah, we can tell that the root and the offset start here at the hip and that the last bone is the ankle bone. So what's going into the multi-port out and that's coming out of this, this port here is correct. It's the ankle bone. So we don't have to do any of that switching up that we did for the hips and tail and shoulders of the Karate Rabbit body. So we can leave that as it is and go back to the top, and then we can connect the deformation group for the Karate Rabbit foot number 2 to the deformation group of the Karate Rabbit leg number 2. So that's how you do that. And of course we're going to do that for the other leg and the other foot, which happen to be right beside. So I'm going to select these 2, drag them downwards so that they're just at a better position. I'm going to click on the leg deformation group, click on the Create Kinematic Output, go into the group, rename this, as leg ankle, hit enter, exit the group again, so go to the top and then connect our port. So that's good. So the last thing we have to do is the 2 hands. So I'm going to select the hand in the camera view, select the network view again, use the keyboard shortcut O to find it. So our hand, one of our hands is here anyway. The O1 hand, and where's the arm? Oh, right beside. Okay, perfect. So there is no deformation group for the arm, but we still have to create another port because we still don't want it to be deformed. So what we're going to do is what we did before, just repeat the entire process. I'm just going to go into rename. Let's call you hand, wrist. We'll go back to the top and we're going to connect, it's probably better like that. We're going to connect the hand to the deformation group of the arm. And of course you have to make sure that this is hand 01 to arm 01, and same with when you find hand 02 and arm 02. And they're all the way over here on this side. And just as with the ankle to foot, it's wrist to hand here, and we know that the bone went from the shoulder to the elbow to the wrist. So once again, we don't have to fool around inside the deformation group for the arm to make sure that the wrist bone is connecting to the hand. We know that it's okay the way it is. And these ones are named well because we see their front, quarter, side. So that was good that we renamed those ones. And just to let you know, the way that I was able to enlarge the network view is by using Command F. It brings you to a split level window, and that brings you to a full window, and then you can use it one more time to reset the view. So it's Command F on Mac and Control F on Windows, just in case you were wondering how I was doing that. So that's it for the tutorial, creating a full character turnaround deformation rig. Stay tuned for the next tutorial, optimizing the skeleton.